I'll start with a brief history of the Cemetery Guardians, then talk about the restoration work we have done at Wilson's Hill Cemetery, Christchurch Cemetery, and the cemetery at the Old Kirk. And that's the three. This is Wilson's Hill, Christchurch, and the Old Kirk. In 2016, members of the Bradford West Gwillimbury Local History Association and Tecumseh and West Gwillimbury Historical Society offered to help the Newton Robinson United Church Cemetery Board do some remedial work in their cemetery to celebrate Canada 150. This project entailed lifting plot cornerstones, finding and raising name and footstones, clearing excess brush, and recording any new information uncovered. And there we are. That's Louis on the left, and Leah on the middle, and Tracy. Some of the volunteers enjoyed the experience so much that they asked the BWGLHA board to suggest other heritage cemeteries that needed restoration. Dr. David Chambers suggested 2 inactive burial grounds that were in a sorry state. And so the 2 we're talking about at the very beginning would be Wilson's Hill and Christchurch. Okay, Wilson's Hill is located at the southeast corner of County Road 27th and the 12th. And Christchurch is on County Road 88, just west of Side Road 10, the corner formerly known as Middletown. This is a new experience for me. First step was to request permission from the Bradford West Gwillimbury as the municipality is assigned responsibility for inactive cemeteries in the Ontario Funeral, Burial and Cremation Services Act. On Thursday, July the 6th, 2017, Tracy and I started work at Wilson's Hill. In the following years, Janine as secretary, Louis, Jake, June, Franz, and David have joined the Cemetery Guardians. Jan B. was invaluable as liaison with the town, and Mark as videographer. Wilson's Hill didn't become an official cemetery until 1858, when James Wilson sold just over an acre of land to the United Presbyterian Congregation of Essa for the sum of 5 shillings. However, the earliest burial was that of Ellen Sutherland, which is on the screen now. Age 1 year, 6 months, 16 days in November 1839. We recently found her footstone marked with her initials ES. There could be at least 40 more burials before 1858. Some may have been lost or unrecorded. The cemetery was used until 1958, when it then became inactive and closed to further burials. When Tracy and I arrived that first day, the open center of the cemetery was being cut by the town crew. 2 riding mowers were in plots where the railings were missing, grinding over the low footstones. 2 features struck us immediately: the canopy of the locust trees and the large amount of brush all around the perimeter. As you can see, there's a bit of a jungle. Many of the tombstones were obscured by small trees, shrubs, and a huge amount of deadwood debris. The canopy of locusts has given us welcome shade over the 6 years we have labored at Wilson's Hill. Some of the dead locusts have now been removed. To do this, Louis and I attach a heavy rope high up in the dead tree. Louis then expertly cuts the trunk with his chainsaw, while I pull the rope to guide the tree down carefully as to avoid damaging other trees, and especially the tombstones. Wilson's Hill is blessed with at least 18 enclosed railed plots. Sadly, Many of the rails and stone posts were either down or out of position. We found a large pile of rails, some with the decorative chain still attached, thrown on top of the harbor plot. On that first day, we were ready to start, but where? The worst spot was beside the north ramp, where we cut the brush and dragged it down the hill to drop at the northeast corner. The town had promised to chip the pile in the fall. As I worked, I remember my first visit to Wilson's Hill with my son in the summer of 1980. That's over 40 years ago. Some years before that visit, Neil McBride and his friends had begun their efforts to save Wilson's Hill from destruction and eventual obscurity. Their efforts must be remembered and celebrated. By the 1960s, it was almost completely overgrown and the monuments were broken and toppled. It had become a party place. I know this because I recently had a conversation with a lady at Wilson's Hill who, as a young girl, lived in the house just north of the cemetery. We have some photos of that period which were sent to Tracy by Neil McBride's daughter, Kathy Michael. Neil McBride is responsible for the planting of many of the trees at Wilson's Hill. Supporters would buy a tree and Neil would make a wooden dedication plaque. The new trees included catalpa, pine, fir, ash, maple, cherry, apple, and dozens of locusts. Neil McBride died October 29th, 1984. Near the entry gate, there's a maple tree and a boulder holding a plaque dedicated to his memory. At Wilson's Hill, the locusts are my favorite feature, but the rail plots come a so close second. Since metal work is one of my skills, I have spent endless hours repairing and replacing the railings. Not that one. That's just one bit. I don't know. That would have been a tree coming down Bennett. This piece and others were bent by the trees that have come down over the decades. Most of the rails in the pile on the harbor plot were straight. The crooked ones had to be bent straight. This task was done by using what we call the bending tree. It is a very old locust tree with two huge connecting trunks. The bark is so thick that I can place the rail in the V and pull it straight without harming the tree. Using my cabinet maker's eye, we now have enough straight rails for the 18 or partial plots. I always apologize to the locust afterwards. The top diagram displays the feature in an averaged. Okay, sorry. These are the 18 rails at Wilson's Hill. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Okay, the top diagram displays the features of an average rail plot. Beside tombstones, there can be monuments, then in front of them, name markers with the names, such as Mother or Helen, carved in relief on the curved tops, and footstones with incised initials. For example, the Cunningham-Arnold rail family plot, drawn below, is 8 foot by 8 foot, the smallest enclosure at Wilson's Hill. It has one tombstone leaning against a locust tree, two tombstones flat on the ground, and a broken stone slot nearby. Most of the stone posts are missing the rail fasteners which have popped out over the years. That's a rail fastener. It was put in with lead. Okay, there are a few copies of the posts and rails over here. You can pick up afterwards. The stonemason, as I showed you the rail fastener, the stonemason would cut rectangular holes in the posts and use lead to connect the fasteners. I can't do that, so I cut fasteners out of angle iron. After painting, I attach them with tap cons just beneath the old hole. The rails come in several lengths and are 3/4 inch square. Most of the rails are installed on the angle, but some are set square to the stone post, which you can see in the drawings. In general, the posts are 4 foot long, half hidden in the ground. All posts have a simple shaped top of various designs. Rebuilding and reinstalling the stone posts has presented many problems. The locust roots have pushed them out of position. Most were broken at the ground level and were often in 3 pieces. In some cases, I had to move the post over, past the root system, but I never cut any of the large roots. Okay, in this picture, this is growing. It's right into the tree, so I just left it. And then I just put a wooden post there. Broken posts are rebuilt with metal plates, concrete, and tap cons. Some ended up with a dog leg to go around the tree roots. Luckily, the soil on the hill is sandy and easy to dig. Hanging on the posts are chain gardens. The chains are now stored at the new rail pile, and I have started to reinstall sections. This work is slow and tedious. Eventually there will be drops. So this is a little model I made of the rails, chains, and these drops. We've had some cast. They go in the middle.
Where would they go?
Yeah, just in the very center.
Oh, okay.
Just down there.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything small enough to do that. While raking around the plots, we have uncovered a few drops resembling bells and thistles. And these are some of them here. Dr. David Chambers kindly had about 30 of the bell designs cast at Toronto Foundry, which he had first visited to cast car parts many years ago. Sorry. In the spring, some of these drops will be attached to the Cunningham plot, located at the top of the north ramp. With their installation, this plot will be fully restored with all the stone posts, railings, and chains intact. This is the first plot Tracy worked on at Wilson's Hill. I hope to get a few of the thistle drops cast in the future for both Wilson's Hill and the Old Kirk. Sadly, there are no iron rail family plots remaining at Christchurch Cemetery. In some cases, I had to use some of the broken rails to make a post to complete the railing around the plot when a tree is in the way. I call this repurposing. To weld the iron, I use oxyacetylene with bronze to make a smooth weld. For over 6 years, I have scoured the wooded areas around the cemetery for full or parts of those hidden by the brush and the debris. I've only found one chunk of stone, which I used for the McCarroll plot. Of course, one of the reasons for the loss of the posts was the replacement of the rail system by 4 simple cornerstones. The family's initials or names are carved on the top. The heavy cornerstones came into fashion just after 1900. At Wilson's Hill, the Hayes and the Chapman-Gilroy plots are good examples. Now we will deal with the problem connected to the tombstones. At Wilson's Hill, most of the stones are standing, but a number have fallen or been knocked down, knocked over by falling trees or vandalism. This is where repurposing gain comes into play. The Eliza Brawley tombstone at the corner of the Cunningham plot is a good example of repurposing materials to erect a falling stone. 2 lengths of 3/4 inch iron were attached to a holder made from flat stock steel. Once this brace is heavily coated with red oxide and flat black paint, it is slid over the stone. The contraption is then driven into the ground to hold the stone upright. So far, I have used this method a dozen times. Early stones must not have bolts or fasteners drilled into them, as they may corrode the stones. If the stone is cracked, I use a minimal amount of industrial glue or epoxy. Tombstones either break off at the ground or fall out of what is known as a stone slot. This is so that's the stone slot that's in the ground, and then that would just be put in there like that. Or, if it doesn't have a stone slot, it's just a long piece, goes into the ground. Some stone slots are very heavy, but even these can move around. It's hard work to maneuver them back into position. We have set a few of the tombstones back into their slots with a minimal amount of fine concrete. The stones that remain flat are raised, and a layer of 3/4 inch drainage gravel is placed underneath. It takes about 4 buckets of stone. Do not use limestone screenings or tailings because it is corrosive. Cleaning the tombstones and monuments can be problematic. Please do not use chemicals or even soap on them. You can just use water, that's all you need, and a toothbrush. A lot of the grime and pollution will come off with a little water and a lot of patience. Do not use any sort of wire brush, sandblasting, or pressure washers. Also, do not try to waterproof the surfaces of the stones with any type of sealant. The Ontario Ministry concerned with heritage has created a booklet, Landscapes of Memories, a guide for conservative historic cemeteries, and it's specific to repairing tombstones, and it is this yellow book at the front here. Some tombstones only have name, birth, and death dates, but many have an inscription near the base. This one reads, "A loving daughter, a sister dear, a faithful friend when she was here. She lived in hope, she died in peace, we trust her joys will never cease." Most of the poetic inscriptions were not recorded in the Tecumseh West Gwillimbury Cemetery inscription book. Tracy is now recording all of the inscriptions to add to our knowledge and history of the heritage cemeteries. Also, because we do not have any church records or plot plans for Wilson's Hill, she is searching all available sources for further information on the burials. She has now compiled a list of 15 more burials that have not been recorded in the cemetery inscription book. She is making connections between families and their related histories. One of the stories concerns James King. He was one of the accused rebels who were found guilty of treason and sentenced to be hung for his involvement in the 1837 rebellion. His wife appealed to save his life. Two men came forward to say that he had been working with them at the time of the insurrection, so he was released. Another story she has uncovered is the sad tale of George and Margaret Neville's, who, in just 7 weeks, lost all 5 of their children to diphtheria. They themselves were gravely ill at the time and in quarantine. George and Margaret went on to have 3 more children. One of them died of convulsions at the age of 2. Their son Gordon was underage when he enlisted in World War I and was only 19 when he was killed in action. He is buried in France and memorialized at Wilson's Hill on the family monument. Bert Harper lies in the Harper plot, once hidden, and that was once hidden under the plot rails. He was a co-worker, roommate, and best friend of William Lyon Mackenzie King. Bert jumped into the Ottawa River to save 2 friends who had fallen through the ice at a skating party. One person was able to save himself, but Bert and Bessie Blair were drowned. He was buried here on his 28th birthday. Mackenzie King raised money for a statue of Sir Galahad as a tribute to Bert's chivalry, the only non-political statue on Parliament Hill. Next door to the Harper plot is the happened to be Hindles. Oh, we got a picture of that now. Oh, okay. Okay, the story, but happened to be, think of that name. 3 pregnant brides were crossing the Atlantic on board the same ship. The first baby born to the 3, 2 days from New York, was named Happened to Be, because he happened to be the first of the babies to arrive. And he was half-hindled for the rest of his life. This year, I had the pleasure of meeting a Dinwoodie descendant at the cemetery. The Dinwoodie plot is largest on the hill. She told me that many years ago her family would visit to cut the grass. Her job was to lift the chains out of the way of the lawnmowers, then after cutting, drop the chains back into place. Our chat verified our suspicion that many of the stone posts and rails are now missing from the Dinwoodie plot. She also said that decades ago her husband made the visitor's box. She was very pleased to find I had completely restored the box after our first season on the job. When visitors sign the book in the box, their comments often provide insights into the family histories of the people interred up on the hill. One visitor comes with a dog on a regular basis and signs his entry with a little dog face. We are now into our 7th year of working at Wilson's Hill. It is, in my estimation, 90% finished. The only problem left is the amount of deadwood debris on the 3-acre site. Every year, Louis and I cut down the Manitoba maples and tidy up the wooded area. The town has made a commitment to eventually remove the debris, and last fall did some work on the lower part. In 2021, the Cemetery Guardians were awarded the 2020 Ontario Historical Society Cemetery Preservation Award to acknowledge the value of our work at Wilson's Hill. The online acceptance speech, read while touring Wilson's Hill, is available on Mark's YouTube channel, Life in South Simcoe County. Now we move on to the next cemetery, which is one in the middle, Christchurch. Christchurch Cemetery in BWG is found just west of where the bustling hamlet of Middletown was once located. This cemetery began early in the history of West Gwillimbury and can be very confusing. When you are driving on the 88 raceway, and it is a raceway, it's crazy. Anyway, There does not appear to be many tombstones, just the tall monuments at the front. Actually, there are at least 75 tombstones, gravestones, and grave markers lying flat on the ground. Many have sunk up to 8 inches into the clay. Over the past 2 summers, Tracy and I have committed endless hours to raising the stones to a bit above the grass. Under the stone, we place a layer of 3/4 inch drainage gravel supplied by the town. In all our cemetery work, we rely on a special book, Cemetery Inscriptions of Tecumseh and West Gwillimbury, compiled and published in the early 1980s by the members of the Tecumseh and West Gwillimbury Historical Society with the help of students paid through government funding. As we work, we are constantly reminded of this book's contribution to our local history. Christchurch is especially difficult to decode. In the book, there are 168 entries for the cemetery, but we can't find stones to match all these entries in the book. For the past 40 years, has taken a toll on the tombstones, monuments, markers, and other artifacts. In some cases, stones have disappeared or inscriptions have become illegible. I always have trouble with that word. Illegible. There is an area in the northwest corner where the stones are not visible. We can only feel them by probing, and this is. I made that. That's the Rolls Royce of probes. This summer, we will be carefully lifting the remainder of the prone stones and placing them on gravel. All our efforts are being recorded and eventually be found online. So far, we have raised 50 out of the 70 stones. Okay, time is not the only culprit in the loss of the stones. The grass cutting is a factor. It is too careless and too fast. You can see here what happens when a grass cutter mower mows over the top of a row of footstones. Every one chipped. You see the chip marks. And believe me, I have complained about this every year. If you visit during the dry summer, you can see an outline of the church building's foundations. It was roughly 36 by 30, not including the heavy front tower and the vestry at the back. The Anglican church structure was built in 1856 and closed in the early 1900s.
Maybe drought.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
The Aronson family tombstones on the west side were the first stones I raised, and I put this around to keep the mowers off. William Aronson, 1784, 1858, his wife Jane, who died in 1871, and their son William, as well as other family members, are together in the large Aronson plot. Oh. This is a book on William Aronson, Rosalie O'Connell. A very interesting man. Not only was William Aronson one of the first trustees of the church, he was a soldier, settler, and politician, the first reeve of West Gwillimbury, and the first warden of Simcoe County from October 1846 to January 1853. The 2-story mud block house William Aronson built is now owned by the Wood family, not far from Christchurch, west of the Highway 400. Simcoe County placed a plaque honoring his contributions just at the farm entrance. In 1851 to 1858, a plank road ran in front of the house and the cemetery. It was constructed of planks, 1 wagon wide and 3 inches thick as a toll road connecting Holland Landing, Bradford and Vaughan Head, with the toll gate at Middletown. When I'm at the cemetery, I try to make sense of the general outlook of the grounds. I've seen 3 pictures that suggest the church was not demolished until the 1960s. When the demolition took place, was it an attempt to tidy up? I know that the elm stumps in the middle of the property were removed with dynamite. This does explain why there are no open spaces with no gravestones. In our work, we have not found many stone slots or footstones. After the removal of the church and the stumps, were the stone slots and footstones removed by well-meaning people trying to create an orderly landscape. The 3 photos of the church show no tombstones in the center front. I suppose all cemeteries have mysteries, and Christchurch is no exception. The raising of the tombstones is very hard work, and that work is rewarded, but that work is rewarded when we expose the whole of the stone. The detailed carving is exquisite, and it illustrates the skill of the stonemasons and monument makers. Some stones are very plain with just the essential details. Others are covered in flowers, rope tassels, leaves, and as on one stone at the front of the cemetery with individual carvings of stonemasons' tools. Some face edges have columns and intricate moldings. In the top of most stones, there may be carvings of clasped hands, the tree of life, angels, doves, an open Bible, or the entry to heaven. The stones range from 2 to 4 inches thick, and the thick ones are heavy, very heavy. At the bottom is the maker's name. One of the frequent names is Borroman from the Bradford Marble Works, or the earlier ones just marked Borroman, Toronto. The Borroman stones are found in every cemetery in Simcoe County. I know the stones we are exposing will eventually be shown online, but go to Christchurch and view them in person. There is parking in front and just to the east, but just be really careful about the traffic. The final cemetery in this talk is the Old Kirk. Situated on the 6th line of BWG west of Side Road 10. The first Presbyterian church was built of logs in 1823. Following the establishment of the Scotch settlement in 1819 by 140 Highland men, women and children. The second church was framed, built in 1827, and the current brick church was built in 1869. You just separate it. Sorry. Just separate it from the one underneath. I can't.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I didn't.
There we go. I'll have to get a better way of doing this. Okay. The buildings is surrounded by on three sides by the Old Kirk Cemetery, with 15 huge white oaks in the as the main feature. Some say there are tombstones dating back to the 1820s. The earliest one I have restored is dated 1830. We did find fragments of an earlier stones, which could be the missing ones. But what is particularly interesting is the positioning of the stone slot deep down. They are set east-west. Every other slot I have dealt with was set north-south. In the summer of 2021, I began work with Dr. David Chambers in the cemetery. And there it is. David has a long history with the preservation of the church itself and wanted to restore and preserve the cemetery behind it. A great number of the tombstones were crooked. We dug around them, pulled them straight, and packed drainage gravel around them. The town had dumped a pile of gravel in the corner of the cemetery for this purpose. Like Wilson's Hill, the old kirk has rail plots, 7 in total. Some of the stone posts were broken and the rails were bent and out of position. One plot appeared to have no rails, but with probing, we found all 8 rails deep in the ground. The posts were crooked, but we straightened them out and bolted the rails back on after constructing new brackets. The repairs on the rail plots were the same as those done at Wilson's Hill. Again, I was determined to keep the riding mowers out of the plots to protect the low-wood footstones and tombstones. David and I raised dozens of name stones and footstones. Some had sunk below the surface, but now are very visible. The name stones are usually in front of the larger monuments and tombstones. The footstones, quite logically, are 6 feet away. These often have the initials of the deceased incised on them. Earlier, I mentioned an 1830 stone. At first, that inscribed date was nowhere to be seen, as we had only found the top half there of the tombstone, along with a complete footstone close to one of the white oaks. We started digging at the tree base amongst the large roots, careful not to damage them. After a few minutes, using my probe, I tried my probe and struck something hard. Over a foot down, we could see the rest of the broken stone. I used a clamp and 2 wood cushions to retrieve the bottom half of the stone with a rope. The stone had cracked and separated along the incised names of the parents, Alex and Eliza McLaughlin. When assembled, the stone read, "Sacred in the memory of John, infant son, 1 year, 2 months, August the 18th, 1830. The stonemaker's name, Armitage, was on the very bottom. The footstone had John's initials. While we were straightening stones near the north wire fence, I did some probing and found 2 complete tombstones, 8 inches underground. Christopher Armstrong and Elizabeth Sutherland. These stones had been recorded in Andrew Hunter's notes of 1908 as referenced in 1982 in the Cemetery Inscriptions book, but had disappeared from view in those intervening years. Andrew Hunter traveled around Simcoe County, often on a bicycle, to collect history. He was a wonderful historian, including the inscriptions in the local cemeteries. His notes are in the county archives at Midhurst. Other gaps in burials and dates are being filled through Tracy's research. Last summer, I restored one of the Bannerman plots, which is enclosed by iron rails and 10 cast iron posts with cannonball tops. It is a double rail plot, but the bottom rails had sunk 8 inches into the ground due to the weight of the posts and the anchoring fieldstone rocks. I dug under the rocks and using scissor jacks to lift the posts back to the original level. I painted all the metal with red oxide and flat black enamel after replacing the 6 missing bottom rails, and their cost was funded by the society. Just to the east of this plot, now raised on gravel, are tombstones, and okay, these are some of the relations of
John David Mick.
the Bannermans are related. George and Christina, not these two, but just nearby, are the maternal grandparents of the Right Honourable John Diefenbaker, Prime Minister of Canada from 1957 to 1863. This summer, I will be fabricating metal braces to support the two tombstones broken by, again, riding mowers. The Macbeth and the Wallace tombstones are each in 3 pieces, which makes for difficult repairing. 2 years ago, the town organised the professional repair of 4 large monuments in Christchurch and the Old Kirk. As well, there are at least 6 more large monuments in the 3 cemeteries that require repair by professionals. 3 of them are at the Old Kirk, including the Campbell Monument, located at the northwest corner. The heavy bases are unstable, set on flimsy materials such as rocks and old concrete. They need to be lifted and a new concrete base poured for each. The BWGLHA and the Cemetery Gardens meet annually to discuss the Old Kirk and other heritage cemeteries that are the town's responsibility. Just to keep us busy and out of trouble, the Guardians have offered to do restoration work at 3 additional sites: Asa Stewart, Belfry, and Sutherland Rogers. And Sutherland Rogers has never been touched. It's a mess. Of course, our restoration work will continue at Wilson's Hill, Christchurch, and the Old Kirk. Restoring a heritage cemetery may sound like a lot of hard work, and it is. But if you can contribute to the cause without needing to buy work boots and a hard hat, if you have a heritage cemetery near you, take an interest, make a point of taking walks there just to keep an eye out. Notice the conditions of the grounds and the tombstones. Investigate whether damage is being done by storms or vandals, or are there any safety risks, like dead trees or branches about to fall. Maybe you would enjoy researching the history of the cemetery. Talk about it with your friends, your municipality, the media, so more people are aware that this is a sacred place that deserves better care. I will end this talk with a clarification. In our work at these cemeteries, we are restoring the general overall appearance of the stones, the plots, and the grounds. I must emphasize that we are not doing archaeology as defined by the Ontario Heritage Act. Take a minute or 2 to explore the display. At the end of the table are a few pickup sheets if you're interested. I would like to thank Tracy for her photos, Mark for doing the videotaping, Mickey, and this society. This is a great society. We're members of both. And also I'd like to thank the library for letting me into this room. That's it. Next time I'll get better than this. Any questions?
Lots of questions.